What new D&D monsters make their first appearance in the fall of 1975? On today's video, we're going to cover that and everything else in the Strategic Review number 3. Please stick around. I'm AZ Mountaineer, and this is our channel, Old School Rules, where we celebrate the community of old school gamers and grognards who like classic RPGs, miniatures, magazines, and everything that goes with it. Today's video continues our look at the Strategic Review with issue number 3 from the autumn of 1975. Hope you enjoy the video. Continuing our look at TSR's quarterly newsletter or zine, this is the Strategic Review number 3, and this is from the fall of 1975. This is the third issue that they have put out. Here's our front page. This one is sort of a slicker paper. It's still the the 8.5 by 11 size and stapled twice on the side. It has just a grayscale, no color this time around. Here's our summary of what's inside. Editorial, some TSR news, the creature feature, new monsters, 9 of them in total this time, which is probably the biggest chunk of what's in here and what we'll take the most time taking a look at because it's of the most interest to those of us who play D&D. A little blurb from the Strategists Club, a monster reference table, which is sort of a tongue-in-cheek article we'll talk about. The Battle of the Ebro River, which is a report in from Paul and Bob Zahray about a recently run wargame battle. Wargaming World, which is their general article about stuff going on in wargaming. Gallery of Gunfighters, Brian Blume's has an article in there about the new game that they've put out called Boot Hill. From the Riven Star Songbook is a poem. Mapping the Dungeon is just sort of a interesting tidbits about what's coming up, right? And then finally an article by Jim Ward called Deserted Cities of Mars. As mentioned in all the prior videos, Gary and Brian Blume, they are the primary editor, assistant editor, but now we have some other people with some credit. This tongue-in-cheek monster reference table is Wesley Ives, and then I mentioned the other people who are participating. Okay, so let's start with a look at the editorial, or as they say, what's going on here? They start off by talking about Donald Featherstone in Wargamer's newsletter and taking a shot at, I guess, a guy named Arnold Hendrick, who largely, according to Gary, took the rules of Fletcher Pratt, who's famous for his naval wargaming rules, and says basically copied those or heavily borrowed from those to make his own game. Apparently this guy's been out there and been critical of stuff that Gary and the people at TSR have put out. So he mentions that he had a rather harsh review of Chainmail once upon a time, which he ignored, but he's proud to say many people wrote to him to say how incensed they were that Mr. Hendricks had such an inappropriate and wrong-headed review. And now Hendrick is back with a D&D review, which again, he doesn't have a very good things to say about the game. And Gary sort of says, once again, I ignore this guy, even though all my fans, all of you, the players, so strongly disagree with him. I'll let your reviews and your sort of activity in terms of purchasing and playing this game speak for itself. So I don't really know this guy Hendrick and or what he did, so I think Gary's kind of right. History has proven who was right and who was wrong about the quality or an importance of the new game D&D. But Gary was a little thin-skinned. He didn't appreciate the criticism. But that's okay. I think most of us as humans don't particularly appreciate when people say bad things about our work. TSR news. So what's going on new at TSR? A lot of stuff, he says. They're going to be putting out a new version of Mike Carr's Fight in the Sky. He says that'll be the 5th edition. And they're putting that out by a division called TSR Games. There's another division called TSRHobbies, which he says Brian Blume is leading up. And that's going to put out some catalog of different miniatures, because it'll talk later on in here about the different miniatures they're helping get out into the market. They announced that Gary has become full-time employed, and now he's responsible for orders, billing, accounting, etc., because they've got so much going on that they need somebody to do that. Upcoming events, no less than 10 titles between rules and different games are nearing completion, they say. They mentioned specifically M.A.R. Barker's Empire of the Petal Throne, which Gary sort of gushingly says is just what does he say? The ultimate in fantasy gaming. You know, it's got this beautiful box, it's got the maps, it's got the big booklet in there, and of course it's a very rich campaign setting. $25, which he sort of acknowledges is pretty steep, because he says you're going to be able to buy just parts of that at a time if you need to do that for sort of, you know, cost monetary reasons. He also mentions they're only going to have booths at Gen Con in another place called Citex 75, which is in Chicago. Maybe they'll do more sort of booths at conventions later. But you can already see that's, you know, it's obviously a big commitment to do that. And he also says we're going to run a tournament game at Origins #1. He says, now we understand our games are going to be filled up, and he says, but wait until the players find out just how horrible a place they will be dungeoneering at Origins 1. He says, after we finally produce Classic Warfare, which is now coming out next summer, they're going to do Blackmore, Don't Give Up the Ship, reprint Ships of the Line, Naval Orders of Battle, and maybe a Star Probe edition or other type of supplement. Who can say for sure? He also mentions that the next issue of Strategic Review will have an advertisement for TSRHobbies in a catalog you can buy that'll then be refundable with your first order. And they're going to have things like minifigs, Der Krieger spells, and scrubby lines of models. Heritage, McEwen are also coming in very soon. So you can see all these companies are sort of reacting and starting to produce more miniatures for fantasy gaming. All right, here's, in my view, the star article this time around, especially from a D&D point of view, and this is the creature feature. And as I mentioned in the teaser coming in, you know, do you know what monsters appear for the first time here in this issue? So the first one is the Yeti, the abominable snowman, if you will. And this is obviously, we all know what it is sort of from legend. They do damage, 2 sort of clawing attacks for 1 to 6 each, and if they both hit in the same round, that means they put you into sort of an owlbear-like bear hug, and then that'll do 2 to 16 points of damage. And even though they're physical attacks, they mention that these should be considered cold damage to your players. So that's the Yeti. And I've looked in the monster manual to see, and this is pretty much what it ends up looking like there as well. Next, we have the Shambling Mound, or the Shambler. And, you know, I guess I never really paid attention to this, or I've forgotten, that this is essentially just a sentient shape of vegetation, right? So it's not an animal or a fantastic creature. It's really animated vegetation. And so that's one of the reasons it's so hard to hit, because, you know, you're just cutting vines or whatever, and you're not really getting to any substantive place. That's why they give it the armor class at 0, because they say your weapons are just going in between the vines or sort of going off the slime. It's really hard to cause damage here. Fire will have no effect. Lightning, remember, actually causes it to grow by an extra hit die. Cold does half damage or no damage due to the vegetable constitution. And all other weapons are only going to do half damage. Since it has the ability to flatten itself, and so crushing attacks also will have not much of an effect upon it. The main way to go after this guy, plant control, charm plant, because it is sentient or semi-sentient vegetation. Okay. The Leprechaun, just like in the monster manual, you got this little fairy creature, and he's got really some powerful things if you think about it. Invisibility at will, repeatedly, as many times as he wants. Polymorph non-living objects, so he can just sort of play with the surroundings, create illusions at will, and ventriloquism. So I've never really used leprechauns, but I think, you know, a clever dungeon master could make a really challenging, fun encounter with these guys. And of course, what they love to do is sneak up and steal valuable stuff from the party, and you'll have to try and chase them down to get your stuff back. The Shrieker, right? The sentient, semi-sentient mushroom that'll give off a shriek and an alert and attract wandering monsters. These things live in subterranean parts of the world. Light within 30 feet, movement within 10 feet causes them to go off. Here it says 1 to 3 turns. I think in the monster manual they tune that down to 1 to 3 rounds, but otherwise this is essentially the same creature. Here's the one that changes the most, and this is the Ghost. And right there at the first line, you'll see the biggest issue. These creatures are not true undead. And so, I mean, I take that to mean that in this edition here, they couldn't be turned. They very much are considered undead, and this line is removed from the monster manual description. But otherwise, basically the same. I guess I didn't remember how sort of nasty a encounter this would be. So they're corporeal, which means you can't attack them at all with any magic weapon unless you can become ethereal or have some telepathic attack. When you see the ghost, you have to save versus magic, or you will age 10 years and flee in panic. Now, here they say if you're above 9th level or 5th level as a cleric, then you don't have to save. In the monster manual, I think the cleric is, I think it's 6th level and above, no save. And then I think 8th level, they give you an above. Non-clerics get a +2 on the save, but not automatically immune to this, which is pretty rough. But, so it goes. And then the ghosts basically have this magic, so they're incorporeal. You're basically probably unable to attack them. And then they aid you, they cause fear, and now he's going to try and magic jar one of your characters, which is a really fearsome attack. And especially because you can't attack him back, right? They say here, like, if that fails, then he'll become corporeal and try and physically attack, which allows him to be attacked in return. Remember, the touch of the ghost ages you 10 to 40 years. Doesn't even say here you get a saving throw. I think I typically give people a saving throw against that aging attack. But does allow you to attack. Here it says magic weapons can do damage, armor class 0. In the monster manual, silver or magic weapons are able to hit the ghost. Then we have the Naga. 3 types of Naga exist: Guardian, Water, and Spirit, and they appear basically like this in the monster manual. The Guardian Naga, which are lawful, because remember here, that's all the basics we have for alignment, becomes lawful good in the book, in the monster manual. So the Guardian Naga, which is the lawful one, does have poison in its bite, can spit poison, and obviously it can constrict you and has cleric spells. The Water Naga, which is the neutral one, typically won't attack, but if provoked, it can attack. It has a poisonous bite, has some magic user spell abilities. And finally, the Spirit Naga, which is, they say, are totally evil and are chaotic evil in the monster manual. And it says here they have human heads at the top of their body, as if maybe the other ones don't. I thought all of them did, frankly, and so maybe somebody can tell me in the comments whether they think I'm wrong about that and where we get clarification of what the other Nagas' faces look like. But in any event, they have a poisonous bite, and then their special thing is their eyes will cast a permanent charm if you don't save versus paralyzation, and they can use both cleric and magic user spells. Then we have the Windwalker, pretty cool monster. It basically, you can hear them coming as they whip, the air, wind is whipping around. Some really funky ways you can attack them if by any miracle you actually knew this stuff without reading the book. Control weather allows a save where it basically kills them instantly. A slow spell basically gives damage like as if a fireball had been done. A haste does a half damage fireball, but also lets them attack twice as many times per round. And they basically can deafen you, and they can cause sort of a wind-based damage effect on you. So pretty rough monster right there. One of my favorites, I think a very classic D&D monster, is the Piercer, which appears here for the first time, basically the same way it appears in the monster manual. We all know what piercers are, right? They look like stalactites, but they fall down. When you get under them, they fall down, attracted by heat and sound, and they'll try to drop on you and pierce you and then eat you. Okay, the Lurker Above. Again, this is pretty much exactly what it's like in the monster manual. This beast looks like a manta ray. It gets up near the top of a large, usually more than 10 foot high part of a dungeon. Its underside can look a lot like rock or stone, and then it will basically drop on you and try and envelop you. It's a great big creature and try and wrap you up, causing the people inside to be unable to attack with anything except for short weapons that they already had in their hands. And it will smother you, constrict you, and kill you. 1 to 6 points of damage per turn. I think that's per round. And you roll a d4 plus 1. 2 to 5 turns, you'll be completely suffocated unless somebody helps you, or you help yourself break free. Pretty tough monster. Okay. So this is the tongue-in-cheek article. This is Monster Reference Table Edition, Hostile Benign Creatures. And he's got descriptions here for these things. He calls the Drolls, the Bydras, the Hobnoblins, the Weregamers, Umpires, Grifferees, Hippogriffs, and green granules. And it's basically just some jokes about things that have to do with gaming. Obviously, the grifferees and the umpires are referees. The green granules are the sand. He said when you're playing, on a sand table like Gary famously had in his basement, you always get the sand everywhere, so that's what the green granules are. So just a silly article. Here's our announcement from the Strategists Club. They say the banquet is 46 of 50 spots are sold at this point, so they're looking forward to a really successful event. And so they're already saying they'll probably do it again the following Gen Con. And they'll announce the results of the voting at the banquet, and then the next quarter's strategic review, they'll share that with everybody else. They tell you what people liked. Fantasy, clearly the number one, then Ancients, Civil War, and World War I. And they said, here, I think this is interesting. So we would not have gone ahead with Boot Hill based solely on the survey answers we received. But sometimes publishers know more about the market than the market knows about itself. We'll see about Boot Hill. It was not their most successful product. So maybe the market, in fact, knew what it wanted after all. But they basically, I think, in all candor, say, like, we were basically already ready to publish this thing. So we're not going to kill it just because we get bad reviews. Plus, Brian Blume, I think, was particularly involved, and he probably would have been a little sore if they'd canceled that product. He says, look, we love Boot Hill. You're going to love it too. There you go. And so here's his new rate for next time request on these things. What do you like the most, or what do you like? J.R.L. Tolkien, R.E. Howard's Conan, Fritz Lieber's Lankmar, John Norman's Gore, Lynn Carter's Jandar of Callisto, Jack Vance's Dying Earth, or anything else in the fantasy genre you want to mention. I'll be interested to see those results as well. Those are some really good books, and I'll be interesting to see how they rank. I think I've read some places that for Gary, R.E. Howard's Conan would be the number one thing, and then maybe Fritz Lieber. Those are the two books that come closest to the swords and sorcery idea that inspired D&D and how he thinks of the game. So this is Bob and Paul Zahray's article, which describes a battle between some folks coming from Barcelona heading south and some people from Valencia heading north, and then they had a battle, and he just basically describes how it all went down, some of the significant moves made between the two parties, sort of just a report about the war game. For Wargaming World, we have a few things in here I think that are interesting that that Gary talks about. He says, we mentioned Conan the first time around, so we'll talk about some miniatures. We told you that Minifigs was coming out with a Conan line, but actually it's going to be more of a sword and sorcery line, but perfectly appropriate to use with Conan. Probably some licensing IP things caused them not to use that name. But 125 figures initially in this line. And he said, we're going to get those, and we'll share some more information about those with you. He says, and they were involved talking to Minifigs about what to do and how to have some suggestions about how the line would turn out. And he says they're really, really good. Other ones, he said, they're coming along. Heritage models, Der Kriegerspell and McEwen, all are going to have good stuff along with Jack Scrubby. So now some magazines. Bushwhacker, a newsletter published by Jagged Panther Publications, covers a wide range of wargaming topics and stresses board gaming. And then they had some spoof off of the Mad magazine, he said, that was really funny in the last issue that he said everybody should enjoy. Signal from Canada, a bi-weekly publication that focuses on game news and product and magazine reviews, including recently some stuff from TSR. So he says, you want to get that. He mentions Bleak December again, fantasy, sword and sorcery, and sci-fi material, interesting classified ads, and says he thinks anyone who collects books of the genre would really like it. Wargamers information. This is from Flying Buffalo in Scottsdale. So we've got issue number 2. This is a really good general newsletter. Keeps you informed what's going on in on wargaming, and so this is a good one to subscribe to. Battle Report, the newsletter of the American Wargaming Association. News, articles, zine, and it also carried some D&D material in issue number 4. And then he says this the AWA is worth looking into if you're interested in any kind of national clubs. Midwest Gaming Review, particularly important for those in the Midwest, 20 pages full of news, articles, and information. So he suggests you wouldn't get that. Aerodrome, this is my car, and it supports Fight in the Sky Society, so it's very tailored to that people who like that game. And then he mentions Europa again, what a good one it is in Europe, and how he thinks it's good that there's a sort of active publication going on over there. He says this one gets published in English, which makes it good for people like me to be able to absorb and read, because you had the UK, Germany, Poland, Sweden, Belgium. He said he couldn't pick a particular language, so they ended up defaulting to English. Another thing he wants to mention here is a new booklet called The Rise and Fall of parentheses Whose Empire. It's a play-by-mail game set in the old empire. You write in, I think, and you get assigned a part of the old empire to work with. He says it's going to be a bit of paperwork, but it looks like it's going to be fun. A guy named Richard Morentz is offering cardboard cutout flats for your revolutionary wargaming. And that's it for the news of the wargaming world. Next, we've got a gallery of gunfighters, the art of gunfighting. And this picks up off of TSR's Boot Hill, but basically he gives you some information about, trying to give you some realism information about how gunfighters were, and the fact that people didn't go around fighting nearly as much as you might think. And certainly, contrary to what you see in the movies, most gunfighters actually didn't carry their 6-shooter in a holster on the side of their thigh like you typically see. A lot of guys put them in their belt. Then there was a special kind of holster that kind of like would allow you to just pivot and keep the gun in the holster, so you wouldn't have to actually try and pull it out. And he gives you some other information about the type of guns and the type of things that people tended to use with their gunslinging fights. And so all in all, just wants to give you a little bit of information if you want to be more realistic when you play their new game, Boot Hill. All right, here's your poem by Moonwolf of Rivenstar, also known as Michael Longcore, who did not get credit in the credits. Here's your poem. Well, I once had a unicorn for a friend, one time a long time ago. His horn was of twisted gold, pointed on the end, and his coat was of silver white snow. Sometimes he'd let me climb up on his back and we'd ride through the mountains all day. He told me the secrets that unicorns know, and I missed him when he went away. I once knew a dragon, a cousin of Puff, all yellow and bright golden red. He looked ferocious, but he never breathed fire. He just blew big smoke rings instead. Sometimes he'd let me climb up on his back and we'd fly through the mountains all day. He told me the secrets that all dragons know, and I missed him when he went away. And now I've got a manticore for a friend, and he sure is ugly to see. He's nasty and vicious, and he'll eat anything, and he's standing right behind. Gobble, gobble, slurp, crunch, crunch. And that's the end of your poem. Silly, but funny. Okay, mapping the dungeon. He starts off by saying if you've got information about your campaign you want to send in, or you want to advertise for your campaign, send it in. Drop us a card. We'll include information about what you've got going on. He mentions a couple here. Rich Schwall from Northbrook, Illinois. He says does a tremendous service for solo D&D players. He exchanges those sealed envelopes if you want to make a solo dungeon. Remember that from the first issue. Al McIntyre informs them of many D&D happenings in the Cincinnati area. He says they have computerized games going on there, including D&D and sci-fi, and 3 play-by-mail D&D games that are going on there. John Vandergraff has an efficient system that allows referees and players to keep track of character data. I think it's like an early character sheet. And he mentions that TSR is working on something similar and hopes to have it in the market soon. Then Dave Arneson, Dave as he calls him, the Fiend Arneson, relates some details of their recent game where the players encountered super Nazis. And so Dave liked to mix things up, very, wonky, sci-fi, etc. And so his D&D player characters have gone through some teleport wormhole and ended up in Germany. And so the battle was, Marty the Elf, Richard the Hairy, and the Great Svenny with some berserkers and other soldiers trying to fight off some army soldiers, trucks, tanks, magazines, mortars, etc. And he talks a little bit about the fight they had. I think 1 or 2 guys get killed before they push back the Nazis. But I think he says that's not all because the Germans are sending in reinforcements, but that'll happen next time. A guy named John Boback and Bill Hoyt have been using D&D as a teaching aid in grade school, and they think that's pretty cool. And they say Bill has a great little book of accounts of these adventures and illustrations of monsters that were prepared by his 6th graders. Then a few clubs. Dave Cox in East Peoria, Illinois. Dave Hartley in Canada. The LGTSA, that's the Lake Geneva Association, that's Rob Kuntz. Lynn Skinney, Rochester, Michigan. Brad Stock, Leawood, Kansas. John Vandergraff, Mount Clemens, Michigan. Paul Wood, St. Clair Shores, Michigan. And the Washington Wargamers, care of Rob Blow in Alexandria, Virginia. And then you've got a little cartoon here at the bottom where the giant hand squashes the person and says, "End of adventure." Finally, there's an article by Jim Ward on the deserted cities of Mars. This is for the Barsoom game, John Carter. And he goes through and talks a little bit about life on the Martian world. And then at the bottom, we've got these charts you can use. I think I have the charts here. Yeah. You can roll up. You know, the avenue. He tells you like there's a structure to how their cities are laid out. And so if you're on an avenue, you roll for lesser palace, hotel, apartment house, side streets, different, roll to see what kind of buildings there. And then you've got the Jedox Palace in the middle, and you roll a little, through these different charts to figure out how to randomly generate your city. Unfortunately, that game didn't last that long, and they weren't able to continue to develop it for IP reasons. So, not really sure if that would ever become particularly good or not. And then here's your discount coupon. If you have the strategic review, you get 50 cents off on your order of Boot Hill. The last page of the strategic review is basically the advertisement for TSRHobbies. They've got some third-party products they're selling here. They've got their product list of the typical things: Greyhawk, Supplement, Tricolor, Cavaliers and Roundheads, War of Wizards, Star Probe, Chainmail, Tractics, Panzer Warfare, Boot Hill, Classic Warfare, and some dice. And then here's what they say is coming in the winter issue: a new D&D character class, more Panzer Warfare, an article on M.A.R. Barker's Empire of the Petal Throne, and maybe the return of other regular columns. That's our look at the Strategic Review number 3. These are a lot of fun, and I think a great way to get into my Prozine or Pro Magazine section of my collection that I think it would be fun to cover. And so we'll be back next time with a look at number 4. Until then, I hope you guys have a great day, and I hope you're subscribed. If you have friends who might be interested in our channel, please send them our way, and hopefully they will subscribe as well. And until next time, my friends, keep rolling 20s.